Sometimes the most confusing moment in a manipulative relationship isn't the argument itself. It's what happens later. You remember the conversation clearly. Maybe a boundary was crossed. Maybe something disrespectful was said. Maybe a promise was broken. And when you bring it up again, something strange happens. He looks at you calmly and says, "That's not how it happened." Or, "You're remembering it wrong." Or the one many women recognize instantly, "You're exaggerating." And suddenly you pause, because you remember the moment very clearly. Through the silver lens, this is where a subtle pattern begins to appear. Because manipulators don't always try to control the present. Sometimes they control the past. At first the changes are small. You mention something that happened. He corrects you calmly. "No, that's not what I said. You took it the wrong way. You misunderstood." It doesn't sound aggressive. In fact, it sounds reasonable. But over time, something strange begins to happen. Events you were once certain about start to feel less clear. You replay conversations in your mind. You question your memory. You start wondering if maybe you misunderstood something. Observers notice the shift. The conversation is no longer about what he did. The conversation becomes about whether it happened at all. And once that shift happens, accountability becomes difficult. Through the silver lens, the psychology becomes clearer. Memory is deeply connected to confidence. When you trust your memory, you trust your perception. And when you trust your perception, you trust your decisions. But when someone repeatedly questions your memory, that confidence slowly weakens. Manipulators understand something important about this. If they cannot change what happened, they can still change how you remember it. And once the memory becomes uncertain, the responsibility becomes blurry. Imagine a moment where someone dismisses your feelings. Later, when you bring it up, he says, "I never said that," or "That conversation didn't go like that." Sometimes he adds something even more subtle. "You're always looking for problems." Now the conversation changes again. Instead of discussing the behavior, you're trying to prove what happened. Through the silver lens, this structure becomes obvious. The focus moved from his actions to your memory, and once the conversation moves there, the manipulator gains an advantage, because proving the past is always harder than addressing the present. Over time, this pattern creates something powerful. You begin double-checking your own perception. You hesitate before bringing things up. You replay conversations in your mind, not because you forgot what happened, but because you're no longer sure you'll be believed. Observers notice the deeper consequence. Your confidence in your own reality slowly weakens. And when that happens, something else becomes easier. Influence. Because the person who trusts their perception the least often becomes the easiest person to control. Through the silver lens, this is when manipulation becomes most effective. But eventually, many women notice something interesting. The confusion isn't random. Whenever a difficult behavior is mentioned, the memory suddenly becomes unclear. But whenever something benefits him, the memory becomes perfectly accurate. Observers recognize the imbalance. The past only becomes negotiable when accountability appears. And once that pattern becomes visible, something changes. You stop debating the past. You stop trying to convince him of what happened. Instead, you start trusting your own observations again. Through the silver lens, that moment is powerful because manipulation often survives through confusion. But the moment someone trusts their perception again, that confusion begins to disappear. Here is the quiet truth many people realize too late. Manipulation doesn't always look like control. Sometimes it looks like reasonable disagreement about the past. But observers understand something important. When someone questions your memory only when it protects them, the issue isn't misunderstanding, it's narrative control. And once you see that pattern clearly, it becomes very difficult to miss again.